Cultural Marxism is a convenient way to describe encroaching leftist dogma and influence on Western society, as well as the strategies they use. As such, it's a trigger term for many leftists. Yet, rather than respond to the arguments made, they do exactly what leftists do when challenged: attack the man, make distractions, and set up strawmen. Today, I'm going to critique one such leftist, YouTuber 3 Arrows, who does his best to sound reasonable, but ultimately fails the logic test. I'll give him credit for a certain level of honesty though, as he does say,
"Philosophy is not my strong side."
What he should have said is,
"Arguments are not my strong suit, nor are evidence, reason, and facts. But did you see that dude made of straw standing over there in the field? What a bastard. Let's get him."
First things first, let's set the definition of cultural Marxism. When freethinkers, conservatives and libertarians use the term these days, this is what we are talking about. Cultural Marxism refers to a school or offshoot of Marxism that conceives of culture as central to the legitimization of oppression, in addition to the economic factors that Karl Marx emphasized. An outgrowth of Western Marxism that found popularity in the 1960s as cultural studies, cultural Marxism asserts that traditional cultural phenomena commonly believed to be intrinsic to Western society, such as the drive for individual acquisition associated with capitalism, nationalism and the nuclear family, gender roles, race, and other forms of cultural identity, are actually historically recent developments that serve to justify and maintain the existence of hierarchy of power. Cultural Marxists use Marxist methods including historical research, the identification of economic interest, and the study of the mutually conditioning relations between parts of a social order to try to understand the complexity of power in contemporary society and to criticize cultural phenomena that appear natural but are actually ideological. So how does 3 Arrows define it?
Everyone seems to have a different definition on this, but the general consensus seems to be that there is a certain group of people, namely Marxists, who try to influence Western culture in a certain way to ultimately bring down Western civilization, which they view as oppressive. Their tools to reach this goal are things like feminism, multiculturalism, diversity quotas, or through arts or social sciences.
His definition is close to the mark, but slightly off, and he expands on it.
The vast majority of people who buy into this theory refer to something called the Frankfurt School as the origin of this subversive movement. Here a bunch of Marxists got together to think of a way to turn a capitalist society into a communist one through different means than calling for the uprising of the proletariat, since this wasn't just appealing to the masses after the disaster of Stalinism. What they came up with was Cultural Marxism, or sometimes called Critical Theory.
This is the establishment of a straw man called the Frankfurt School conspiracy. Throughout the video, he repeatedly tears it down as though that somehow changes the facts. Leftists, aka Marxists, are indeed doing what they can to subvert Western civilization through the indoctrination of children, pushing feminism and cultural relativism. This is not a conspiracy, it's the objective facts and stated goal of many Marxists. So what is the Frankfurt School and Critical Theory? Founded in 1923 Frankfurt, Germany by Felix Weil, it operated out of Goethe University. It brought together various schools of Marxist thought for the purpose of research and discussion. Critical theory seeks to emancipate human beings from slavery and identifies what it deems the domination of humans by oppressors. It aims to decrease oppression and domination in order to increase freedoms. It is highly critical of capitalism and attempts to create what it calls a balance between the needs of the individual and the needs of the collective. It expanded Marxist criticism of capitalism to criticism of all social institutions. It calls for the emancipation of humans from both economic and social domination. It argues there is no objective knowledge because all knowledge comes from preconceived assumptions placed on us by society. You know how leftists, especially feminists, are constantly talking about more white male privilege? That's critical theory. So when 3 Arrows says this,
what they came up with was Cultural Marxism, or sometimes called Critical Theory.
He gets it completely backwards. What the Frankfurt School came up with was critical theory, and the term cultural Marxism is just a simple way to describe it.
Now you might be wondering, what do the Nazis have to do with this?
One thing you need to realize with these Antifa types is it's always the Nazis.
Starting in the Weimar Republic and up until 1945, the far right used the term cultural Bolshevism to demonstrate how the Bolsheviks tried to subvert German society with progressive art, lifestyle and things like Bauhaus architecture, to eventually take over completely while simultaneously destroying the appreciation of non-degenerate art.
Yep, it's always those damn Nazis. Remember, if a Nazi said something and you ever use a similar term, you must be a Nazi. Oh, and don't you dare own a Nazi dog. That makes you a super evil bad Nazi. This is nothing but a guilt by the loosest association possible. He even uses the cliched label far right to describe the National Socialist German Workers' Party.
Right, who were the National Socialist German Workers' Party? I don't think I've ever heard of them.
Great question, Short Bus. They were the Nazis.
Right, what? Wait a minute, have we talked about this before?
Yep, remember the Blair Cottrell video?
Oh yeah, that one was awesome. Thanks, Matty.
Anyway, Nazis aren't far right. It's just a label leftists use to conflate their political opponents with Nazis, who are actually left-wing socialists.
But even as a layman, reading up on the Frankfurt School and the work of the theorists there, it becomes blatantly obvious that it doesn't fit the narrative of the Cultural Marxism conspiracy theory.
When he says,
"Philosophy is not my strong side,"
it's arguably the only truthful thing he says in this entire video. As I already pointed out, it's not a conspiracy theory to highlight the origins of cultural Marxism. Critical theory directly influences modern leftists. This is a fact. The term conspiracy theory is just an ad hominem.
Culture today is infecting everything with sameness. Film, radio, and magazines form a system. Each branch of culture is unanimous within itself, and all are unanimous together. Film and radio no longer need to present themselves as art.
Now that sounded awfully similar to Paul Joseph Watson's criticism of modern entertainment.
Look at popular music.
It's funny because earlier he quoted Goebbels and said, "Oh my god, they said the same thing, therefore they are the same." Now suddenly he says, "They said the same thing, but they are totally not the same." Isn't Paul Joseph Watson now a critical theorist? I mean, he said the same thing as critical theorists. Besides, in his video about pop music, Watson clearly highlights why pop music is so bad. It's more to do with familiarity than Marxism. Familiarity and simplistic repetition sells music.
The Frankfurt School criticizes the exact same thing in their book Dialectic of Enlightenment, under the chapter The Culture Industry, only that Adorno believes capitalism is at fault for this. And you know, maybe he has a point there. What is more likely to be the reason for this? Is it maybe that sex sells and gets attention? Or is it the plan of Adorno and Horkheimer, who would have despised this, to secretly utter in a new era of communism?
Just because a proponent of critical theory says the same thing as Paul Joseph Watson about popular culture doesn't mean Watson is wrong. Sex sells, yes, but the hypersexualization of our society is a result of the breakdown of the family and traditional Christian morals, all pushed by leftist critical theorists in universities and throughout the media. It's his video about modern art where he decries the cultural relativists, and he's completely right. Modern art is rubbish and is pushed by so-called experts. It's also funded by the taxpayer in many cases. Capitalism has absolutely nothing to do with it. Three Arrows moves on to point out critical theorist Jürgen Habermas' criticism of postmodernism.
Now some of you might be asking yourself, a Marxist criticizing postmodernism? How does that go together, since Peterson always mentions those postmodern neo-Marxists?
This is ironic given critical theory itself is a Marxist criticism of classical Marxist thought. Yes, Marxists critique the other ideas of other Marxists. It's rare, but it does happen. Habermas is a Marxist, and so was Jacques Derrida. The fact that they disagreed on certain aspects of Marxism does not change the fact they were both Marxists.
Well, this really shows the big problem when people talk about these things on YouTube. They use certain words so interchangeably without explaining what they are actually talking about until these words have lost all their meaning. Marxism is the same thing as communism, which is the same thing as postmodernism and Stalinism, etc, etc. They should just call them the bad guys from now on, seriously.
How about state collectivists? Or just Marxists, because that's what they are, and yeah, the bad guys is an accurate description. Marxism is bad. Marxism is always bad. no matter its variant. 100 million people died to prove that point. They are all the same atheistic collectivist rubbish. They all come from the same school of thought. Just as Protestantism and Catholicism are different in application, yet are both Christianity, collectivist rubbish is collectivist rubbish.
While people like Adorno, Horkheimer, Löwenthal and Neumann were Marxists, they were hardly hell-bent on destroying Western values or civilization. In fact, they wanted to hold on and promote these values like rationalism and personal freedom.
Here he knocks that strawman down in one fell swoop. He frames the argument as, "People think the Frankfurt School wanted to destroy Europe. This isn't true, therefore similar criticisms of critical theorists today are wrong." No, that's not the argument. The argument is critical theory is destructive and doesn't offer an informed view of the world. The argument is that modern Marxists, who are strongly influenced by critical theory, want to destroy Western civilization because they see it as the main barrier to Marxist utopia. Whether the founders of the Frankfurt School agree with this assessment or not is entirely irrelevant because this is the view of modern Marxists. We know this is the view of modern Marxists because they tell us every single day. They hate white privilege. They hate capitalism. They think all cultures are the same, so it doesn't matter if we flood the West with third world migrants who hate us. Knocking down a straw man does not change the fact that it's a straw man.
You know, there's a reason Wikipedia had to remove the entry for Cultural Marxism and move it to the entry of the Frankfurt School as a conspiracy theory.
Styx Hexenhammer explains this situation clearly in his video on the topic. I'll link in the description, but it's essentially an indictment on Wikipedia, not the idea itself. It's not a conspiracy theory as already mentioned.
Ultimately, this theory is defeated by one question. Where is the evidence? Where is it?
The evidence is the words and actions of every feminist at university and every leftist dribbling rubbish on taxpayer-funded TV. The evidence is the domination of political correctness throughout culture. The mere suggestion the West close its borders and cut immigration are met with howls of indignation. And don't even think of saying women would be happier at home taking care of their husbands and children. Hell, you can't even say there are biological differences between men and women without a massive whinge. A man got fired from his job at one of the most powerful corporations in the world for saying just that.
Don't forget, Marxists call what they are doing cultural Marxism too.
Ah, yep. Good one, short bus. And there's all the evidence in this video. Goodness me.
In the birth country of Marx, the two biggest communist parties, which are the German Communist Party and the Marxist-Leninist Party, didn't even get more than 0.1% of the votes combined. Trump is president and Brexit happened and all of Europe is shifting to the right. But since I saw some college students waving a USSR flag on YouTube, this really is the biggest threat to Western values, I guess.
And look at the reaction from the establishment. It's been one of the biggest dummy spits in history. The EU has done everything in its power to prevent Brexit, and do I need to go over what Trump has had to deal with? How many non-leftist professors are there? How many non-left journalists? Who gets the majority of taxpayer funding? Ideas on the left or ideas on the right? Setting up a straw man is one fallacy. Cherry-picking evidence and distracting from the facts is another. Just because Marxists are losing at the ballot box as people wake up doesn't mean they aren't a threat. Nor does it mean they are not the establishment. Feminism dominates the West. That doesn't mean people support feminism. He leaves the best bit of rubbish to the end.
The doctrine of Marxism repudiates the aristocratic principle of nature and substitutes it for eternal privilege of force and energy, numerical mass and its dead weight. Thus it denies the individual worth of the human personality, impugns the teaching of nationhood and race have primary significance, and by doing this it takes away the very foundations of human existence and human civilization. If the Marxist teaching were to be accepted as the foundation of life in the universe, it would lead to the disappearance of all order that is conceivable to the human mind. And thus the adoption of such law would provoke chaos in the structure of the greatest organism that we know, with the result that the inhabitants of this planet Earth would disappear. Now, who might have wrote this? Is it from this book? Or this book? Or maybe from the manifesto of mass murderer Anders Breivik, since he also believed in cultural Marxism? Well, all very good guesses, but it's actually from this book. Specifically from Chapter 2, Years of Study and Suffering in Vienna.
And there you have it, everyone. It's all because of the Nazis, you see. Hitler called out cultural Marxism, therefore anyone else who calls out Marxism must be Hitler. What he conveniently leaves out is the fact that when Hitler joined the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Communist Party of Germany had more than 300,000 members and was getting between 5 and 10 million votes. Yes, that's right, communism was threatening to take over the nation. Germans saw the Nazis as a viable socialist alternative to USSR-controlled communists. Marxists were a threat then, just as they are now. So when he says,
"It's nothing but Red Scare hysteria, then and now," the cultural Bolshevism conspiracy theory of the Nazis is inseparable to the cultural Marxism meme of today.
he betrays a deep ignorance of history. There is one major difference to then and now. In Weimar Germany, socialists fought against Marxism by claiming to be Marx-Light, and now it's classical liberals and conservatives fighting against it. Hitler essentially said,
"Don't listen to that Marx fella! Listen to his good friend George Hegel instead!"
the threat was real then, and it's real now. The ideas are inseparable not because it's a conspiracy theory, but because it's 100% true. The difference is the proposed solutions. Three Arrows finishes up by proving without a doubt he doesn't know what he's talking about. Either that, or he's a pathological liar.
These parallels are not incidental. Do you think that in any of Sargon's videos he shows the link between what he calls cultural Marxists and even a sentence by anyone of the Frankfurt School? Neither does Stefan Molyneux, Paul Joseph Watson or Aidan Paladin.
Did you notice how he leaves Jordan Peterson off that list? I wonder if it's because of
And
this.
how about a quick summary of critical theory?
Well, critical theory, in a nutshell, it's an idea that came from the Frankfurt School in Germany. It transfers over to Columbia University. It is some German scholars who are Marxists, and what they are saying is that Marxism as an economic unit or as an economic philosophy really doesn't work. It doesn't transfer very well. But let's change it over to a social theory. And it's a theory of oppressor and oppressed, and it's very bifurcated. You are either one or the other, and if you are the oppressed, you're good, and if you're the oppressor, you're bad. And it's as simple as that. There's no nuance. Or okay, I'm being as bad as they are. So I'm giving you the really broad strokes on this. But essentially, it does set up the villain and the victim, and it is the idea that we must do everything to silence the villain, the oppressor,
And to center the oppressed.
yes, and then we will elevate the oppressed. And
The same thing happened essentially with the French deconstructionists
Yes.
in the 1970s.
It is. So this is the motivation behind it. So, but when you hear them talk about critical theory, it is not critical thinking. There's a big difference. And so parents will hear, well, they're teaching critical theory. Isn't that a good thing? No, because critical thinking means I'm going to show you both sides of this argument. Critical theory means I'm going to deliberately give you one side of the argument. I'm going to tell you who's right, and I'm going to tell you who's wrong. There's an oppressor and an oppressed. The oppressor is the bad guy. The oppressed is the good guy. And it's a very manipulative way of thinking.
Okay, so
Mate, you really should have stopped here.
Philosophy is not my strong side.
Yes, it really, truly isn't.
He's a Nazi!
Hey guys, thanks for watching. Just a little bit sick, so I'm a bit croaky. Really hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, just could you share it around? YouTube aren't going to recommend it to anyone because the algorithm makes it a lot harder for our videos to get shared unless we're part of the mainstream media, like we're Jimmy Kimmel or Samantha Bee or someone crap like that. So yeah, just share it around. Click the like, comment, subscribe if you want to. Click the bell if you want to get notifications. Check out the live streams, and I'll see you when I see ya.
Philosophy is not my strong side, but